Oya Batalota, or hello, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternities, a live discussion on The Expanse, Season 1. Now, if you're wondering why am I doing a live stream on a season that came out 8 years ago, I think it was 8 years ago. The answer is recently got the whole series of The Expanse on Blu-ray for my birthday a few months ago. So I've been rewatching it slowly. Like I've been prioritizing watching Star Trek, but I've been rewatching it. And so I decided each time I finish watching a season, we're going to go ahead and do a live discussion. And thankfully, Darrin has agreed to join me for this, who also rewatched The Expanse very recently. Darrin, thanks so much for joining.
Oh, I am so excited to be jumping in and talking about this show. It's so good. It's so well. Here, actually, let me give our little intro to the spats and to maybe a little more current stuff. One of the reasons we've been going back to some old things is been watching some current sci-fi. The Acolyte, we'll throw out there just real quick. Not really a good show. I've got a lot of problems, really, from a technical. The writing's pedantic. The dialogue makes George Lucas seem like a wordsmith, and the lighting is atrocious, which is a shame because there's obviously a lot of production quality that's put into this, a lot of makeup effects, a lot of things like that, and the lit by overhead lights, the fluorescence is kind of what it looks like. It's like an office, everything equally lit. It's just it's just disappointing. And I was trying to find a bright side, and I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe this would have been better earlier. Maybe it's just I'm spoiled with some of the modern stuff. Maybe if something like this came out like 8, 10 years ago, it would look so much better. And then I had to pause because I'm like, no, because then it would have to be competing with The Expanse, which does so much right with its sound, its lighting, its depth, its character, its focus. I mean, it's exquisitely created. And so I'm so excited to just get a chance to jump back in to the seat of the Rossi here and do a little screaming Firehawks action.
Well, I don't want to talk too much about the acolyte because that's not why we're here. But
That is not why we're here. That is
I just will
not
say real quick is
why we're here.
I will say real quick is that I don't dislike it as much as you do. I don't think it's the greatest thing ever, but I'm enjoying it. I certainly don't think it's as bad as a lot of people claim it to be. Certainly not as bad as Book of Boba Fett or something like that. But also, like, so with the Expanse, I am going to be a tinge negative here because I got some criticisms of season one, which is what we're here to exclusively talk about season one. As I said, we're going to do each season, hopefully, as I finish watching them. And I will say season one is easily my least favorite season of the show. Now, I do think this is overall is an amazing show. I believe I called this once my favorite show of all time, which I think fits. So keep that in mind when I say season one's the my least favorite season. It's an amazing, least favorite season. An amazing show is still a much better season than the vast majority of other shows with their seasons. But when I compare it to other seasons of The Expanse, I don't think it quite stacks up. And so we'll just start with my main issue with it, and that is, and this I think affected the show onward since season four until season four, is their decision to end the season before they finished book one. I think that was a huge mistake, and it really season three actually suffers the most from this decision. It was like a domino effect, and I kind of get what they were thinking. Is that they were thinking that um, they wanted to make it more fluid because you haven't read the books, have you, Darren?
No, my wife's done the audiobook. I've actually
Oh, right.
read about 2/3 of the way through the first book, and then I lost my copy. Um,
Oh no.
yeah.
That's like,
So, I mean, it tracks pretty well, I found, for the most part, at least
yeah.
through first book. I know there's more changes going on afterwards.
So there's quite a few though in the first book, and there's some I really like as well, which I'll get to. Like the changes the show make, I think the show did some things better. But in terms of pacing or like cutting the season off before we hit the end of the first books, so in the books, each book like is almost like a standalone movie. It's like if you look at the series of books separately, like each book it's like a Star Wars trilogy or something, not even Lord of the Rings, because that was basically one story. It's like each book was like had an ending, and then there was like time off in between, and then we caught up with them, and it felt like, oh yeah, we've been doing this, we've been doing that. It felt like there was a space between, but the feel that they were going for, and well, at least the first four books, I would say book 5 and 6 blend together, and then books 7, 8, and 9 blend together, but that's something different. But I think the show wanted to do more of a feeling of sort of going off of like Game of Thrones or other serialized shows like Breaking Bad or whatever, where it all blended together and tried to sort of erase the sort of standalone feelings that each book had. And I think that was a mistake. I think that was ultimately to the show's detriment. I think there was a lot of stuff in season one that either was kind of, I would call filler, and that they could have cut in order to reach the end of book one by the end of season one, because I think that would have been a more satisfying ending for the season. And yes, they would probably have to add a couple episodes, maybe have 13 instead of 10, but I think the other seasons would have fared better, because I think both season 2 and 3 felt disjointed, because at the start of the season you're finishing out the previous story, then you're starting a new story, and then it ends halfway through, and the next season you finish up the other story. Anyway, I don't know, Darren, if you had any thoughts on this, because
Um,
even though you didn't read the books, you could probably still tell like where the
Oh no, I mean it's especially
yeah
having watched the whole thing. Yeah, and it has that whole thing. It's like you could feel like, oh, the first book is basically the Eros story. You know, meet everybody and up through the whole Eros and completing that incident. And the second one is afterwards. After that, heads off to Venus, and it does its whole thing, and we start the beginnings of the war. And then the next book is obviously when giant space squid comes out and forms the ring.
yeah
Um, so yeah, I mean, you can kind of feel, and definitely, I remember first watching that transition in the middle of season two from what is obviously the end of book one into book two. Is like, okay, what's going on? And yeah, especially season three really suffers because that last book is like gangbusters from beginning to end.
yeah
It really feels like it's a rush through that whole part of the story. Um, the one thing that I do actually like about how they did set up season one, and I also have my own couple of criticisms, oddly, also with the lighting and some of those. I think
Yes, I was thinking about the lighting when you mentioned the lighting, the acolyte.
they were definitely experimenting in the first couple episodes.
Yeah,
Is how do we want to set space and the harshness and the light, and what do we want to do when there's a lot of close up and really harsh light angles and things, which it felt like even by the end of season one, they were kind of like, okay, I think we're making some adjustments. They kind of got through their feet. And I think even some of its story pacing did that as well. The one thing I did like about how they did set up the season is it does feel very compartmentalized in each section of, we'll just say, the Rossies and their crew developments. The first one is we meet everybody and we lose the can't. The second one is we're lost in space and then we're recovered by Mars. Third one is okay, we got the Martian ship and then stuff goes wrong and then we escape and then we've got to find uh, someone to help us, and that's how we meet Fred Johnson. And then we meet Fred Johnson and we head off on the. So each of their stories, I think, is really a kind of a nice little compact, a tale that really feels like it's that beginning and end of a section of this story, which I think worked really, really well. And where they did end it, at least you kind of get that first Eros hint, and then we're out. And you also get the promise that Miller's going to return, because obviously he doesn't really get past book one as Miller, we'll say.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I completely see where you're going, and I think down the end of the story that there were things that suffered for it. But I really do feel like this season they were almost still trying to figure out, like, how exactly we're going to tell this story.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
know, what do we need to do? What's going to work and what's not going to work? And I think one of the best things to come out of this is I think they learned a lot of lessons through this first season that just made the few better seasons and how those stories were told so much better.
That is true. Like maybe if they told all of book one, season one, it wouldn't have been as good as the first half of season two because they seem to have learned a lot from season one and improved some things a bit. Because that first half of season two is just fucking is like amazing. It's so good.
Yeah, that's
But
go in the better way,
yeah. That's when like the plot really kicks in. But my other major complaint of season one is that I feel like it's too confusing for first time watchers, and that you really have to be into this sci-fi to sort of get into this, which I think is a shame because I think the future seasons are more universal. Because I noticed this because there's been several times where I had friends like, you gotta watch the Expanse, this show is amazing, you gotta watch it, and they watch like the first 3 or 4 episodes, like, nah, I don't like it, it's not for me, I can't follow, it's too confusing. And I remember even when my parents watched, because they ended up loving The Expanse, but the first season they have a hard time getting through and almost quit. And I had to sit there and watch it with them and explain what was going on, because they do throw too much world building at you, I believe, at the same time at once. I went back and watched my original reviews when I was watching it for the first time, where I hadn't read the books, and so I was very confused at first of exactly what the dynamics of the situation is. But I think most of all, I think of the Miller storyline as being really confusing. Like, I think and the books it was more straightforward. In the show they added in stuff to try to pad it, which again, this is kind of the filler I was talking about,
Mm-hmm.
by having like the broker who died, or him going to a party where they're watching this guy slingshot around the moon or some shit, and all that stuff was really unnecessary, but also it was just confusing. Like, I didn't the Miller storyline, I think, was so hard to track when I first watched it, and I think a lot of other people felt the same way and they just couldn't get into it. So I think a lot of people hit this wall with season one, they give up before they watch the rest of this great show, which is a shame. So I think they could have done season one in a better way to sort of be not as confusing and so more inclusive.
Oh yeah, I mean, when I was praising the setup for the storyline, you notice that I did focus on the crew of the Rossi, which I think it's structured more, because it does feel like Miller's story is a little looser in how it kind of floats and going. And obviously, we're trying to learn about really the Belters and the power structure and what's going on with the OPA and the whole Julie Mao bit. And I mean, uh, I I love Miller in this, and I really enjoy his storyline, and I enjoy the character, and I love the idea of that kind of noir detective in space. That I'm kind of corrupt, but I also kind of want to do the right thing. And of course, the heart is what ends up leading. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff around with Miller. Um, but I think that is one of the weaker parts of the storyline. And they give, I know the opening episode, they kind of give a little basic background on like, okay, where we are, and Belchers are out here, and Earth and Mars, and we have kind of that little drone fly through Eros, or sorry, not Eros, a series in the beginning there, while the Belter is talking out of his stuff with the cool throat thing and giving a speech, and this is the flight of the Belters. I think they definitely were trying to give a background, but it's almost like we're going to throw it at you and hope you're paying attention because we got to keep going. Um, and to consider that they actually padded Miller's story when they could have used that time to do a little slower world build, that would probably have been a better use of their time. But I also, again, think they tried some stuff and they learned the right lessons with what didn't work this season to make the other seasons work so much better. And so, yeah, season ones are tough. It's always tough when you get things off the ground, especially the first couple episodes. That's why often you're like, you got to watch at least half the season, or so, to see them start to get their feet underneath them. But hard sci-fi is not everyone's cup of tea. And I think that's one of the real strengths of this show. But that also means you got to kind of dive in and be invested and pay attention, because they've got too many things they got to move through.
I think it does get more, well, like once you get past like the first half of season one. I think there's a lot more universal themes that you don't really have to be huge into sci-fi to love this show, because there's some just universal things that I think just work. Now, you mentioned before that you were currently watching Battlestar Galactica, rewatching that.
Yeah.
I like this show better than Battlestar Galactica. That's where I differ from my sister, who preferred Battlestar Galactica. I didn't like that show as much as she did, and she didn't like The Expanse as much as I did. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Because I think The Expanse, I think it benefits from being based off books, because I think the structure, even though I'm complaining about the structure of season one, but I think overall the structure was better. And I think with Battlestar Galactica, it was kind of more obvious to me that they didn't really have a plan. They kind of just were winging it. And I think towards the end of the show, that showed a bit too much. But anyway, what were your thoughts?
I've got to kind of agree with you with a lot of that. I love Battlestar. I mean, as a kid, is when the first one came out with Dirk Benedict and Richard Hatch and everything. And so, I mean, Lorne Greene, I love that. It was only on for one season. As a kid, it seemed like years to me. Also, they just kept replaying it on Sundays. So I loved when Battlestar came on. I loved how they changed the storyline, the point of view for it. Battlestar is a great historical science fiction series because, in my mind, you can actually see the transition from old storytelling to new storytelling, especially through that first season. There's a little goofier kind of sci-fi. There's a little fun, back or beast plots or sea plots that are going on, and occasional little bits. It's just an old kind of, you could feel that old networky general storytelling structure.
Are you talking about the newer Battlestar? Because that's what I was talking about. Okay.
Yes, I am talking about, no.
Right.
With the newer Battlestar, so I'm saying through season one,
Yeah.
I think you can see that transition from the old 90s previous storytelling into the modern kind of sharper, more serialized storytelling. So it does an amazing thing. But yeah, through season 3 and season 4, there's a little fallout, there's a little fluff. There's some episodes where I'm like, oh, I remember I didn't like this episode. Or you've completely forgot stuff because you're like, oh, that's right, because this doesn't matter. But yeah, The Expanse definitely benefits from being an adaptation. The story is already there. They just have to figure out how to set that structure up. And obviously that's what they played with the first couple of seasons. But I think it definitely benefits. But no, I mean, it's a graduation to me of Battlestar Galactica, of kind of trying to lead into more of a harder sci-fi, take that lessons, pull off the religious aspect of it, but use that kind of feel of space, that kind of look and idea. I think it really benefits from kind of even that the tone of it really works because of that. But I think it took those lessons and went, okay, how do we adapt that for what we want to do, to give that kind of like intense drama, but still sci-fi element to it.
Well, the reason why I compare these two is there's a lot of similarities. Not just that they're sci-fi shows set in space; they go for that same sort of dark and gritty tone.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally think The Expanse pulls it off better. Like one specific example in season one that we're talking about is the backstory of Fred Johnson, which I thought was fucking brilliant, where they showed the strikers and the station and how they just want water and they want air and they're being treated like terrorists, and then they all get blown up and we see like the father and his daughter floating in space and dying. That was like very fucking heartbreaking. It's so that's very similar to the kind of thing that Battlestar would do, because they always hit the hard questions or ask the hard moral dilemmas. But I think, honestly, and this is actually kind of most of this, like that in particular, was original to the show. They totally
Mm-hmm.
changed Fred Johnson's backstory. So I think this gritty, like moral dilemma feel was actually more original to the show rather than being in the books. And I think they did a better job at it.
Well, no, I think you're exactly right. I mean, there was the miniseries, but the first actual episode of Battlestar Galactica 33 is they haven't slept in days, in weeks, because they're on drugs, because every 33 minutes the Cylons are jumping out and they've got to jump again, and they end up having to blow up a ship that may have innocents on board. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's an enemy ship. It's they hit those hard punches, and that's what I think what made Battlestar Galactica the strong series of its time. No, Expanse takes that and goes, great, that's the idea that we want to be. That's the real hard hitting that we want to do. How do we now do that with, nearly a decade later, with storytellings and stuff like that, and be able to do it? Interesting, both on sci-fi here in the
Yes.
States.
Yes. So that, because I want to address that, because in the chat, Peter was saying that the other thing with BST is that one needs to realize it was on network TV right during the occupation of Iraq, etc. Had some very brave episodes against that backdrop. But it wasn't on network TV, because isn't sci-fi not considered? It wasn't on sci-fi.
Well, I know at least here in the States, it was on Sci-Fi, but it's still
Yeah.
effectively a cable show. It may have been different.
Like, I was living in New Zealand when it came out. It was on network TV then, because they just picked up random shows. But it was an American, Canadian, North American made show. So in that, it was on like cable networks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, it was able to be a little more hard hitting because of where it was. But yeah, it did do some great stuff. I mean, really, the it reads definitely more militaristic, especially on a second, third viewing. You're seeing the battle between civilian and military, and they definitely lean a little bit more on the conservative edge through a lot of that show. But I think that again, but that's what I'm saying. Just I think Expanse kind of like took that type of visual storytelling, that kind of tone, and applied that very well to the books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I personally think that because, as Peter in the chat was talking about BSG being of its time, I think the time of The Expanse, which was what I believe it was 2016 when this came out. Oh no, 2015.
2015, yeah.
Yeah. So God, that was nearly 9 years ago. But anyway, but I think the backdrop of that is Game of Thrones was huge at the moment. It was like the height of its popularity. And it was when it just started, because it was gaining steam. It wasn't huge when it first started. And by 2015, it was huge. And I do think that did influence this show, especially considering that The authors of The Expanse were friends with George R. R. Martin, and what was it?
Helps.
Ty Frank was actually George R. R. Martin's assistant for a while, and that the Expanse. I don't know if you heard the story, but the Expanse was actually the books were based off of a role playing session, like a role playing game that George R. R. Martin was involved with. He was in that group, and they were doing like this role playing game, and they eventually turned it into books. But they got rid of George R. R. Martin wasn't there long enough, so they got rid of his character because his character was a dwarf. Because of course it was. But the funny thing is that you know how they have the character of Shed, the medic, who dies in episode 4,
Yeah.
and they said that's because there was a guy playing that character in the role playing game and he bowed out, and so they killed off his character. And it's funny, but it was just I think it was just the first book that I've had, or maybe even the first part of the first book that was based off the role playing game. But anyway, my main point was that I think they did take a lot of inspiration from Game of Thrones, and I think that's part of the reason why they want to mesh it together and not do the sort of more serialized format.
So, are you implying that nepotism has its hand in play in the film industry? That's crazy talk. Hey, you know, if that's what's going to get you the work, that's what's going to get your thing done. You know, you got to use every tool at your disposal, I guess. No. I did not know that story. That's awesome. But I mean, that was one of the great things that Game of Thrones did. It really did bring that prestige television to the fore and really show that if you invest money in, you invest in time, you invest in quality, it can really pay off. Now, of course, as executives go, they take the complete wrong lesson from that, pick up something cheap, produce it cheap, but spend a lot of money for it somehow, so that nobody cares to actually watch it. We'll get back to prestige television one day, folks. I believe it in my heart.
Yeah, I think that the golden age of television, I think we're talking about this in another stream, is over. Like I think it was like in the 2010s and in the 2020s, it's kind of died off. It's you get the House Dragon and a couple shows here and there, but for the most part, it's just not as like there as it was in the 2010s, especially the late 2010s, like 2015 to 2020. It was like really like not just the Expanse of Game of Thrones, but like there was so much out there, Mr. Robot, and just all these.
Oh yeah.
Shows. Now the Netflix shows are kind of dragged. They're kind of bland. Actually, they used to be like really powerful.
Well, I mean, that have decided away from the Expanse here, but I think these are the problems when you have a lot of non-creative types making business decisions in regards to creativity. Is you can't middle of the roller. I mean, we all like things because they are different and unique and have a depth and a storyline. And yes, one thing is not necessarily for everyone. People have different tastes, but you have to be able to really recognize and invest in the creativity and support that growth and development. Because if you just look at everything from, what's the bottom line at the end of this quarter right now, you're gonna be just making knockoffs of knockoffs that get increasingly bland, and then you complain why nobody watches your shows.
And I think the too many streaming networks has also like dumbed things down.
Well, and you don't have a difference between prestige because, regular television and cable has been kind of in its change and in its gut. And that's been the traditional how we make our money model. And then you had HBO and your, Showtime, principally just those two with a couple little side ones that were saying, okay, but we're subscription and we'll take your movies and stuff, but then we'll make some of our own stuff and we can really invest. And that's going to drive subscribers. And these are two different models. And what they're trying to do now is they're like, well, let's just take all of our advertisement stuff and just move it to subscribers and go, great, you'll grow for a little while with that. But at a point, everybody who's going to subscribe subscribes, and that tops off your revenue. And then they're like, but we have to keep making money.
Yeah.
What if we just throw an ad or two in, and then they do the tier thing. And so it's the creativity, art is not a business product. And look, Hollywood's been doing this for years. Okay, it's called show business, not show friends. Every project is made in order to make money.
Yes.
But it's always going to weigh out who's going to invest, who's going to take risks, and what kind of return is it that you're going to expect. When a lot of people are doing it, there's a lot of risks that are being taken. Some fail, but some interesting stuff succeeds. When that only becomes a handful of players that are making those bets, they all want to bet on the one thing that's going to win, and everything else falls to the fray. And again, creativity does not exist in that. You've got to have seasons and writers and stuff like that.
I'm hoping it will improve, because it seems like this whole streaming wars bubble is going to implode, because it went outward with all of these different services and they're all failing because none of them are profitable, and now they're going to join or just be erased altogether. Like, I'm certain that Paramount Plus is not going to be around much longer, and stuff like Peacock and stuff like that are all going to either merge or die out.
Hey, I was just reading about the failure of the Redstone merger with Paramount Plus that just happened like last week. Was all set up to go with Skydance and fell apart at the last minute because it didn't feel right.
Yeah. But anyway, so Alex in the chat saying streaming has become cable again with the same prices added together. Yeah, that is the sad truth of everything. But
we did all this to reinvent 90s cable, folks. You're welcome. There you go.
I mean, it worked for like a good 8 years or something, and then it just collapsed. But anyway, there's an interesting thing in the chat I wanted to address. Alex is saying many fans call Holden Space Jon Snow. I had not heard that one before. I don't know if that holds.
I mean, I don't see it that way. To me, Holden is kind of a classic, hero's journey bit where he is at the beginning resisting the call to adventure. Things happen. He has to step up, finds that he is the right person for that, and then becomes the moral, center for the team going forward. So much as that's, part of all of Amos's, in fact, arc here in the beginning of the first book is Amos is always looking for his North Star, First it's Naomi, and then he finds out, no, this is going to be Holden, because Holden will make the bad choices and regret it when he has to, but he's always trying to make the right one. And, to me, John is much more of a, I guess he's constantly resisting the call to adventure through most of it. But I don't see him. I mean, again, he's kind of a moral character, but not the same type of, to me, not the same type of leader that Holden is.
Yeah. So yeah, just looking at the chat, Peter was saying that problem with a lot of sci-fi fantasy is that they often involve a lot of world building and need time to mature. Proverbially, Riker needs to grow his beard. And yeah, that could relate to season 1 of The Expanse. I think there are some shows, and I think this is more rare, but there's some shows that hit the ground running and in fact are better than their first season and kind of go downhill afterwards, which is not preferable either. Like Mr. Robot, I'm thinking of, and Lost is probably another example of that. But yeah, I think it's usually the other way around. Usually they start out a bit slow and they need to, like, Discovery took like 4 years to get going, in my opinion. But yeah,
by the final season, we're ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. Jeez.
I mean, yes, it definitely can, but I again, I don't think that it, depending on how it presents, it has to be done right. And I'll just put a current example: Fallout. I think the Fallout series hit the ground running,
Haven't watched it.
and well, I mean, I won't spoil anything, but I think, and viewer numbers will suffice, especially the feedback that everyone got, how many people really enjoyed it who knew nothing about the Fallout series prior to that. I think they were able to accept all those changes and views and go on. Now, it's not a hard sci-fi bit, and it certainly leans into, old 50s view of the future with sort of a different little twist to it. So there's a certain, I think, cultural familiarity to that. Um, but I think that it's still an example of something where it's able to do world build, put out Easter eggs for people that can recognize, oh my God, that's a hyperstim or whatever. Explain what's necessary to everyone else, and then move on if it doesn't. It's like, I think that they balance that out all really well. And I think with Expanse, in some ways, it's just, you just have to make that mental jump to how this world looks and operates. And then once you do, and I think you do that by about midpoint through season 1,
Yeah,
things
but
move a lot easier.
as I said, I think the main problem is with the Expanse. I mean, it was kind of world building, but I think it had more to do with the confusing plot, particularly with the Miller storyline. I think, as you said, and sometimes the Ava Sorella storyline can be a bit confusing as well, with a lot of intrigue and whatnot. And I think the Holden stuff, the Rosnate stuff, that was more straightforward and easy to follow. But yeah, I feel like, especially the Miller stuff, I feel like they just got too bogged down. And like this, so this ship is going there. It was like, it was so hard to track what the actual conspiracy was.
And I think that it was real easy, especially on first viewing, to not make the connection that they're talking about the same ships and things. I think it's very easy to lose. Like, what is it that we found, and how does this have to do with anything? And why? Who's this Julie Mao and going around bit? And what was that thing that I saw before? You're right. I think there was just so much stuff that tied to the Miller part of the storyline. They took a long time to connect to what Holden and everyone on the Rossi was. It was like, and that was, to me, again, a much tighter story and so much easier to follow, where Miller was like, what is this even mystery all about?
Well, see, that's why I feel like they should have done, season 1 should have ended where book 1 ended, because in book 1, Holden and Miller meet up halfway through the book. So if they met up halfway through the season, I think that would have worked a lot better than people, rather than they meet up at the end of the season.
At the end, yeah. No. I totally agree on that. And yeah, Alex, I completely agree with that. The plot of season 1 is a lot more clear on a rewatch. And again, having just rewatched it, to me, I love where they're dropping little hints and things and stuff. I see a lot more of that. But that is sometimes the hard part of when you're too involved in with a storyline. You can't see the forest for the trees, and it's hard to see your intricately designed, progression, how that looks from somebody that has no idea what you're talking about.
I think, I just want to say in the chat, Alex saying sometimes it takes a show a season or two to find his footing, like TNG SGU. I gotta disagree with about SGU. I actually like season 1 better than season 2, but that is Stargate Universe.
Yeah,
but that is just me. Have you seen Stargate Universe, Dan?
Oh yeah, no. I loved that, and I loved how they ended it, not knowing if they'd be picked up or not. I thought that they found a perfect way to end that.
Yeah.
To leave the audience floating just like the people on the ship.
It's funny because everyone always used to be like, like the Stargate fans that hated SGU because it was a different tone than the other Stargate shows. They always used to be like, it's just copying Battlestar Galactica. But it's like the first season of SGU is literally exactly the same as the first season of Lost. Like, it broke it down like they were so copying Lost.
Well, no, but it needed to do that. It needed to change the tone from the old
Oh,
Stargate,
absolutely.
and that's why I'm saying that's the interesting thing about BSG is
Absolutely.
you can watch almost like the transition from Stargate storytelling to Stargate universe storytelling
Yeah.
within that. How you've got to go, okay, we're taking this a little more edgy, not as 90s edge, but still pretty edgy.
Yeah. I totally agree. Like SG is my favorite Stargate show, personally. But even though it only lasted 2 seasons and it was canceled before they finished the goddamn story, which is something that always pissed me off. But anyway, getting back to the Expanse, Alex is saying I agree. Season 1 should have been all book 1, but it would have required 13 episodes. Yes, it would have.
Yeah.
And it's possible that could be a business thing. It could be that they only greenlit 10 episodes and they wanted to see how the show was doing first before they did more. But I still think they should have navigated it to get the episodes that they needed to do it. Because here's an interesting tidbit I heard is that when they went in and pitched the idea of the show to the studio heads or the people at Alcon or something. I don't know, some high up
Yeah, I
people.
think that's right.
And when they went in to pitch it, one of the who was the showrunner for the first season, I can't remember his name, but he dropped off and Noreen Shankar took over shortly after. But he pitched it, and his pitch was to describe the end of book 1. So the season 2, episode 5, Home, the stuff with Miller and Eros and meets Julie Mal. So that's how they pitched the show. They pitched that idea, and as he was describing it, apparently he brought some of these executives to tears by describing it. And that I can see why, because that's like my favorite episode of television of all time. Like I fucking love that episode. But it doesn't make sense why they saved it for season 2. If that was their pitch, that was the way they went, they should have got to it at the end of season 1.
Yes, but there's also a business decision behind this, and that involves Thomas Jane. For season 1, ending it where it did, you've got your little bit of a cliffhanger. The characters are together, and if it's a hit, you can still bring back Thomas Jane for at least a little while as Miller, and you get kind of you get to build on top of that. Because to me, that was the only name that was in this show at the time. I mean, not that Thomas Jane was a big thing, but he is a big sci-fi fan, and I know that he gets kind of involved in these things. So I think from a pitching standpoint is, hey, and if it's a hit, we can continue to build on with this character and then wrap up that big storyline, and that'll propel us on with the next stuff, and then later on, obviously, we can bring them back when we get the Miller reflections and such like that. But I think from a business standpoint, to be able to promise that hook to bring an audience forward if this does end up working. And yeah, that way you get less episodes, but you can kind of fill those out and work your things out and then still be able to have something to promise the audience that it's familiar with in the following season. And that's just, to me, that's an executive kind of line of thinking.
I can definitely see that way of like the business side looking at it, but another way of looking at it would be Thomas Jane's probably the most expensive actor there, and hey, you only have to pay him for 1 season.
That is fair as well. Again, I don't know what all these inner rooms work out with, but I think you're trying to pitch this first season as a no, this will be really good, trust us, and the never going, definitely, how much do we need to cost and what is the investment to bring this going forward?
But if describing that events brought the execs to tears, like they could have trusted that would have been enough hook to keep the viewership over to season 2, even though Thomas Jane wouldn't be in it anymore.
Sure.
I think. I think honestly, and from what some of the interviews that I've read and stuff from the showrunners and people who created the show, I get the impression that ending season one in the middle of book one was a actually creative decision and not a business decision. But I could be wrong. But that is definitely the impression that I get.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm totally making this up in my head. Well, this could be what they're thinking. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
from a creative standpoint, it. I don't know. Again, I think Miller was adjusted to serve the storyline of Holden and the Rossi crew, because I do think the pacing for their story through these episodes and everything works really, really well. And I think Miller's storyline suffered. I don't recall what happened with Officer Rala in the beginning of the book at all. That was ages ago. Um, but I think that
So,
that probably suffered to structure that A story right, and then fill in B and C story. However, that would, you know.
so I was going to get to some of the stuff I think the show did better than the
Yes.
book in season one, and so if you were just saying, I'm not sure what Alva Sorella was up to in book one, the answer is she was up to nothing because she wasn't in book one. Um, she was
Okay.
she was introduced in book two. And so I think the decision to bring her forward was actually a really, really good one.
Yeah.
I know some people who read the books disagree with this, but I think it added a lot to the show because that is my problem. Because I say season one's my least favorite season of the show, but I also think, well, no, book one's not quite my least favorite book. Actually, book four is, but that's a whole nother story. But book one is also like down on the list compared to the other books for me because it is feels more like confined of a story. It doesn't feel like you're in a greater world because you only have two viewpoint characters, Holden and Miller, and you go switch
And
back
you
and
jump
forth.
back and forth chapter to chapter,
Yeah, so
right?
you only get the Miller stuff in series, and you only get the Holden stuff on, Rosnate and all the adventures he goes on. So I think you miss out on by having Alva Sorella there, and they also added other stuff like a Fred Johnson flashback, and they added like other things here and there, which I think fleshed out the world and made it have that more of Game of Thrones like vast, expanse, pardon the term, feeling of like not just being these two stories that you feel like you're more involved in the universe, and that I think they did well, and I think even though by having Avasarala, they had to push up some of the stuff that she did in book two up to the first season. Like, for example, her finding out Aaron Wright was in on it and on the conspiracy. She finds that out at the end of season one. But in the books, it doesn't happen until like halfway through book two, like where season two ends, basically. So they had to bring some stuff forward and make some changes, but I think it was absolutely worth it, and I think it really worked. To have that, to have that more, because you didn't actually see Earth side of thing in book one. Like you just saw the belt, you saw some Martian stuff, but you didn't really see anything. You've just heard it talked about. To actually go to Earth and actually get the perspective of the leaders, I think that just added so much in terms of world building.
Oh, I mean, I have to completely agree. I love Avasarala. I love the whole story. I love the arc, how she starts out as this, really everything for Earth, and even through halfway through the season, she's starting to see the weight of stuff, the larger picture, where the boots are stepping down. It's I think it's definitely the right choice, because it just jumping from Holden to Miller's perspective, it does kind of focus things, but you don't get that larger world. And I think it is the larger world that we feel and allows us to jump to Earth's perspective and what's happening with Christian. And then it jumps up, allows us to see uh, Fred Johnson. Sorry, name was leaving me for a moment. his bit. And yes, the fact that they were able to tell his little backstory, I think that was brilliant. And then when you get the reflections on Earth, where the fleet commander, I guess ex-fleet command, was talking about, oh, we didn't tell him that they had surrendered and so on, and he didn't even complain, he just walked away. Through these bits you really get a strong sense of each of those characters that don't have to necessarily be told to us. We can see, and then the choices that Johnson makes, both for the belt and even later on sacrificing part of his own interests, you get to see what that character is. And I think without bringing Earth in and getting that third perspective, you'd just be locked in too much. You would limit the storytelling that you could actually do. And yeah, season 1 stumbles a little bit here and there, but I think by establishing that, it really does pay off and allows a bigger investment in, allows us to invest in everybody else, every other character's investment in the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Peter in chat saying, I like the ending in the middle of season 2. It puts viewers off balance, just like Game of Thrones initially did, having the big twist episode 9, not the finale. Yeah, see, I don't think it's worth it. Like, I think it would make more sense, because when I saw that episode home in the middle of season 2, I thought, like, this feels like a finale. Like, it felt like a finale. Like, I don't know. And I just think it would have made more sense to just begin and end each season that way.
I think what this really does is it underlines the fact that 13 to 15 season episodes, or episode seasons, is really the way to go. 10 is not enough. You need that 13 to 15 so you can really flesh things out and get things right. And yeah, if they had been willing to do that, I think, in fact, probably the last 2 episodes of season 1 could have been almost squished together. Maybe take the last 3 and squish those down to 2, and then you would have 4 more episodes, which is almost the amount of time that they took in season 2. I guess it was 5 episodes, the first 5 episodes there, to wrap that story up. They probably could have balanced that out then if they had 13 episodes, or even 14.
So I think another benefit that the show had, that the show did better in the books, and I think it was the benefit because when they were writing season 1 of the show, the authors who were executive producers and so were in the writing room, they were working on book 5, so they were already knew ahead of what was going to happen. And so you get this thing that didn't happen in the books where they start setting things up that we'll get to eventually. But like, for example, with Naomi's backstory and her being involved in the OPA, and she refused to tell about her history, but yet she knows a lot about the OPA. So it's implying and saying, oh, when she talks about Fred Johnson, she's like, I've known people who are fanatical and whatever. And we now know she's talking about Marco. And the writers were aware of this at the time when they were writing a show, but in the books, none of this was foreshadowed. In fact, when we got to the Marco Inara stuff in book 5, it felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. Where the show did, since it knew what was coming, it did a much better job of like setting the stage for that and setting things up. In fact, speaking of Marco Inaros, I heard that the first episode where we see Avasarala have that belter pinned to the wall and doing the gravity torture, that he was there trying to acquire stealth technology, and that was for throwing the asteroids at Earth for Marco Inaros. So he was working for Marco Inaros, and they were setting that up that early.
Oh, I mean, again, didn't know that story. To me, that's even cooler because it shows them learning their own lessons of stuff that they could have done before to flesh stuff out that they can now put in order to make this adaptation of their own story even better and more complete. Because that is one thing I even pointed out with my wife when we were watching is, oh, she's talking about Marcos. Oh, when she's going to Fred Johnson, I'm going to ask you to find someone. I'm not going to tell you who it is now, but you're going to. I'm like, and that's her son that she's doing it.
Yeah.
My favorite little bit, honestly, is the scene that has Avasarala sitting, laying back on her roof, and her grandkid comes out, and they're watching the meteor shoot across the sky. And she's just like, "I don't like people that throw rocks," And you have that one that kind of falls. That's a little bigger, and it's total foreshadowing of what is to come. And that was one of the things I was really enjoying. Again, it's why it's season one. I think does work better on a rewatch. I think the whole series does. I think it gives more and more on a rewatch. Um, but it's those nice little bits that I love that they have set up. And to me, that shows a true level of craftsmanship, especially in series storytelling. So the fact that the writers were in there, I mean, one thing, I think the writers being involved in this show is a definite benefit to it. But
Oh
the
yeah.
fact that they were working on a future book and going, okay, we're going to start laying that groundwork right here, when we couldn't do that before because we didn't think about that story when we did the first book.
Yeah.
I think is brilliant, and definitely shows it's like, let's really create something. A harder and harder thing to do like that these days.
So getting back to more of the negative, where I said that season one had too much filler and that they could have cut it out and to make room to hit. Like I think it's even possible they could have hit the end of book one within 10 episodes without it feeling rushed, but they would have had to really, maybe you wouldn't have gotten as much world building and much character growth, but I think it's doable. It would have been better with 13 episodes, but I think there was a lot of like filler that could have went. In particular, the two worst offenders to me that as I'm rewatching and I'm thinking, we don't need this. Like this is just here to take up space. The biggest one to me is seeing Diago out with his uncle flying the belt and getting harassed by the Martians. And I heard someone put the argument to me as like, no, you need that for the world building, but no, you don't,
No.
because we already get that the Martians treat belters like shit. That are the inners, I should say, treat belters like shit, and they're constantly harassed. We already know that. We don't need an entire storyline that is actually kind of boring and doesn't add anything to anything. And the other storyline that I think was a complete waste of time could have went as Avasarala going to visit Holden's mother. That seemed just like a very sloppy way to get exposition about Holden's family, and it actually doesn't make sense to me that a world leader would want to get information on a suspected terrorist by talking to his mother. It just seems like a silly concept. And yes, the two actors were great, and yes, they acted well off each other, but that scene was really unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, if they want to tighten things up, it's definitely stuff that you can. It's a beautiful bit. I love the scene of Avasarala walking across the snow in that big red dress. I mean, it's
I
like,
mean, the wardrobe is amazing.
yeah, we want to get our cinematic shots here. Did you need a whole episode of even that of Avasarala's B story dealing with all of that? Probably not. It I mean, it is a way of just showing how Avasarala has a different way of gathering things, and is willing to go around inside. And even again, her true motivation is she actually wants to find the truth, and she's just not the cold-hearted bitch that everybody thinks that she is. Um, so, I mean, yeah, I like that scene. I certainly liked it more than the one with Diogo and his uncle out there. You're right. That totally could have. It's like, what is it, in season 2 that we get the whole engine mix
Oh yeah, we'll get to
storyline,
that when they talk
which
about yeah,
again, fun
yeah.
enough, but do you need that paced through the entire episode? No, you could have probably told that in one little bit or history lesson or
Honestly,
whatever.
like, well, that's more of a season 2 thing. But
Sure.
honestly, to me, that was more DVD extras. That was webisodes. Like that doesn't even need to be in the show. I think.
Yeah. And obviously Miller's storyline's a little padded there, so you didn't really
Yeah,
need
like the stuff.
necessarily need
Yeah,
that.
like the stuff. There was this one guy. I totally forgot the scene it existed, and I've seen the show so many times. But that one time he was interrogating that one guy, he tied him up, and the guy was like friends with Julie or something, talking about how like kind Julie was. And I'm just thinking, like, there's a reason why I forgot the scene existed. It's like completely unnecessary, and like
It doesn't really tell us anything except it has
no.
Miller lamenting more about you didn't really know Julie, did you? It's like, dude, you don't know Julie. Come on, man.
And the whole thing with like the broker, he's looking at the dating profile, finds the dead body of the broker, and then finds like they could have done a much quicker way of doing all that.
Sure.
And spent that time actually getting to the end of book one. I'm just very, very insistent on that. Honestly, I mean, I guess I just dislike the Avasarala talking to Holden's mother scene more. I mean, yeah, it's well acted, but I really think not even if you want to save time, just in general, like that scene does not need to be there. Like I think it shouldn't be there.
Uh, yeah, I mean, again, it's I mean, to me, it's a nice enough scene. I don't hate it for any reason or anything like that, but it's not a real necessary scene. Again,
Yeah,
there's a couple of those where you could definitely either they didn't contribute anything to the storyline, and but I think that's the one really, especially with Diogo, is that actually contributes nothing
yeah,
to the
no,
storyline.
true,
The
absolutely.
Alicerella one at least gives you some background of why she thinks Holden is and has some
Well,
purpose with it. The other one is
it's kind
just,
of the Avasarala thing is kind of a lazy way to dump exposition about Holden. I felt.
well, we need to know about this character. Mom, tell us everything about your son, but just the important parts. Go. Yeah. No. Agreed. That's why I think in some ways the idea, it was almost constructed around what are we telling with Holden and the Rossi crew, and then what do we need to fill in those spaces there if we're going to stretch this out. But yeah, if they had gotten a couple more episodes, I think that they would have been much better to probably squeeze all of book one into season one. For what they did, I mean, I think it still mostly works.
I think it's still an amazing show. I still
Yeah.
love this season because when I first watched it, it got me into it. Like, of course, season two is when I really was blown away and like this is the best episode, best show ever. I wasn't thinking that in season one, but I was thinking, no, this is a really good show, and I definitely want to keep watching it. But I think it even itself it picks up towards the end of season one. Like I think there's all right, you have the episode 4 with the Dollinger attack, which is pretty amazing.
Right.
And still a really great scene. But after that, you had it just dragged a bit. You had that mid-season filler stuff because that's when you got the Diago stuff and Holden's mom stuff, but also in general, like they just slowed it down and they should have got it going. But then once we get into and the whole thing with the donkey balls, like that was funny and all, but wasn't really that necessary. Like you didn't need to have that whole thing.
Honestly, that episode particularly feels a lot like I think it's a season 2 one where they've got to go get rearmed and they go to the old busted Martian ship and they run into the survivors there. It's like,
season 3.
was that season 3?
Yeah,
See,
that was season 3. Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's another one of those episodes where it's like, can we just get past this? We don't really need this, and it's just there's so much more interesting stuff coming up. Let's move on.
Exactly. But really, especially once they get into they search the Anubis and see the proto molecule, especially when they get to Eros and the big showdown at the hotel happens, which is fucking. I just love that scene. It is so damn good. So to me, that's when the season really kicked into gear, and I think that they could have gotten there quicker, personally. And I think a lot of people who gave up on the show might not have given up the show if they didn't meander so much in that middle bit.
Sure.
But that, yeah, talking about that scene at the hotel at Eris was so good because just the subtle way everything was implied. Because Holden and Naomi were sitting there talking, oblivious to whatever's going on. But the spy, what's his name? Kato, can't remember that spy's name.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was looking
He's
nervous as fuck. He was looking around at the certain people, and you see these people who are we know that they're like, the SWAT team or whatever, the special forces team from Earth that are there setting up. And Amos is just quietly he's looking at what's his face, the spy. Yep. And he's looking at them and he's just very quietly like getting his hand ready on his gun. And freaking Holden and them are still, and Alex are just completely oblivious to this all. It was so good. Like at tension building, it was just so damn good.
Oh, and the fact that they take this time, because it's like this couple walks in, and these one
Yes.
person runs, and someone else does. And
Someone's
yeah,
getting
just watch
Coke from the Coke machine. And
Amos is gonna be like, there's a lot of people around. You know, this is starting to feel like, yeah. It's starting to feel like something's about to go down. No. I love that scene, and especially because that's also where you finally get the meetup between Miller and Holden.
Yes.
In that whole section too, and how they all play off. It's just like it is perfect. It's a perfect way of showing who characters are and how they respond, and thus who can you trust and who's on your side, at least for just the moment. It really sets it up beautifully kinetically, but it also doesn't weaken anyone because they're still arguing as they're going into Julie's, going up to Julie's room, and Miller's leading one port, then Holden's like, don't touch her, things could be infected. It's like you can see they're starting to like realize this person seems to be on my side, but it doesn't do it in a blatant like, let's sit down and have the little like hash it out conversation first. It keeps that kinetic rhythm and shows that they can work with each other because of how they all react and interact in that situation. And yeah, I think that whole bit's just beautifully done.
Absolutely.
And that's, by the way, the thief there, of course, is Elias Koteas, who plays the alien in Star Trek Discovery's final season. The Breen.
Have you seen? Yeah, the Breen. I was gonna say I didn't want to say Breen if you hadn't seen the whole season, but yeah,
I'm still part way through the season, but I do know he's a Breen. And hey, you finally get to see the Breen.
It was. I didn't recognize him at all. I had to be told that he was the actor with all that makeup on in Discovery.
I follow him on Twitter, and he's just he's showing like him as a kid in a Star Trek uniform and stuff, and then just like, I'm so happy, but I didn't realize he was the guy in this, so I came at it the other way around. Yeah.
No, right, yeah, no. He was actually in an episode of season 1 of Discovery, and I recognized him there. I was like, hey, that's the dude who was in Expanse. In fact, in that scene, it was like when one of the first episodes when Burnham was being like a prisoner and being transported to the Discovery for the first time, and she was with 3 other prisoners who were like wanted to attack her for some dumb reason, I don't know. But the 3 other prisoners were all played by actors who appeared on The Expanse. So it's like 3 Expanse actors.
See, there's respect in the industry for people that have contributed to good stuff. That's
awesome. Both shows are shot in Toronto, so they tend to use a lot of the same like.
Don't give me real word reasons for things, man. Ruining it all. Oh,
but awesome. So another really, really amazing bit that I loved is so you talked about the stuff when they first found Julie Mao at the hotel, but I love how the very next episode we cut to flashbacks of what happened to Julie. And this is like a massive improvement from the books because the books did not do this at all. We did not get the backstory of Julie. And I think that was really neat, especially with how confusing they made this whole Julie storyline at the start of the season. It was so needed to actually get the backstory, and plus it gives her a lot of character. She's no longer just this faceless, nameless damsel, whatever, that Miller's trying to rescue. That you get more of a face to her and what she was going through, and you really feel for her as she's dying and calling out the dolls and being like, why aren't you answering, like, and it really like hits home. And it's one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. I think I fucking loved it.
Oh no, I mean it is an awesome character exploration there. Yeah, you do get to see all of the stuff, the real her, because again, it's been mostly just through interpretation stories or Miller's thoughts or whichever. So you really get, I mean, outside of that first opening scene, at the
Yeah,
very
yeah.
beginning. But yeah, and it's also nice because you get to see where everything happened in timeline, which I
Yes.
think is wonderful. It's like how she got caught and then put up, and then, oh, this is when they fight the Cant and they take this out, and then this is when this happens, and how they're like almost just missing each other as as they're moving around the belt. Yeah, and when she's reaching out and trying to get a hold of Dawson for help, and it's like, yeah, it doesn't really get the same response as she was kind of hoping for. She's even cast aside, which is what Miller was, of course, accusing Dawes of without even really knowing a lot of the real story. But he could see, hey, man, you just let her go. You let her out there. It's like, yeah, you kind of did. So, yeah, to give that human connection in with Julie and even her motivation, how she's just like, my fucking dad's doing stuff and he's going to be crushing all over the belt and we got to stop him. This is my dad and I'm here to help to fight him to save the belt, and how that just falls apart, how her dedication is a great thing. I mean, it ends up, where it is, but it's I don't know. It just makes it so tragic. You really do feel so much, so that when again they go back and then you see them coming in the room again and having all of those moments, you're feeling it, those moments a second time, but in an even deeper way.
The one thing I will say is that something I thought the books were better at is that I think, especially the first time I saw the show before I read the books, I was a bit confused on who it was that was doing the evil proto-molecule shit, like who destroyed the Canterbury. And I think the books was a lot more clearer that it was like basically a third-party corporation, like a private mercenaries or private security thing that was doing it. And I think that could have been made clearer in the show, because when I first saw the show, I thought it was the Earth like government that was actually doing it, which technically, what's his face, Aaron Wright is involved with them, but but it's not an official like the Earth military involved. It's actually like a third party that's responsible for all this shit.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that they did. Again, having seen it a couple of times, I'm knowing where the storyline and everything goes. But I do recall being a little confused even the first time kind of watching it. It's like, okay, so this is where they go and this is where Julie is. But who are these people again? And why do they have this stuff? You got to remember, it's like later on, it might even be until 2 where they mention, oh, that 2 ships left Phoebe Station. One had this and one had the personnel in it. And, trying to figure that, and then why did this get out, and how that was all a little messy. As I said, I think once we get kind of Julie's story, we understand where everything is in placement and kind of what ship is what and who did what. But I don't think they're still very strong in the why. Like, okay, so who exactly is this and why did this? Was it an accident? Did it start? Did they do it on their own? Did they have orders? That did feel a little unclear.
I mean, it's explained a little more in season 2, but it should have been explained by the end of season 1, which is why they should have ended season 1 with the end of the book. But yeah.
Yeah, I think they probably could have done that a little bit better. And again, these are all mini critiques on still a season that is awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Amazing show.
Brandon, sorry, I just want to jump in. Brandon, the chat and mentioned something what confused him why Uncle Mateo was so pissed off. Um, One, I think he was, and honestly, this also confused me the first time that I saw it. Was like, is he mad at Diogo? Is he mad at the Martians? Is he just drunk? Is he insane? I mean, probably a little bit of all of that, but I
Yeah.
think mostly it's the Martians were messing with him. He's drunk. They make him go the long way around, and he's not really going to have enough fuel. So the likelihood that they could die on that on, and I think he was just kind of like, man, you pushed me and you pushed me and you can't push me anymore. And I'm gonna take. I don't even care. Get out of here, youngin. You're gonna be okay. I don't know why he's talking like that, but apparently it went in my head. Just get on. I can't do a good belter. Get on out of here.
Yeah.
Someone will pick you up in the middle of space. Someone will pick you up. Wow, that's a big leap of faith there, Uncle Mateo.
You know, it's funny. I thought that guy was dead, like Diego, when they just got abandoned in space. After watching that episode, I was like, oh yeah, he's dead. But
Oh
then
yeah, and then he pops
again in season
on.
2.
Yeah, Diogo, you are invincible. And he gets shot in the head at the with a gel gun, or was that no? That's next season. Sorry. I start after I watched season 1. I had to go start watching season 2. I was like, I have to stop, but that's all I'm going to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brandon, that's Martian, not Belter. Yes.
What's Martian? What?
Oh, he's just laughing at my West old coop accent.
Oh, right.
You just get on back. Oh, they just don't be doing that.
Oh yeah,
my old minor voice.
I forgot about the old Alex and the Cowboys Martians.
Because you try to wipe that from your brain. Yeah, we won't talk about Alex. Well, we can talk about Alex, but not. No.
But Jared Harris was fucking amazing.
Oh man, Jared Harris is always awesome. I was so bad they didn't get him at the final season.
No, it's a shame because they tried, and he said he really wanted to do it, but he was busy filming Foundation and couldn't do it. And I was like, damn it.
He should have done the Expanse instead. No, I'm not kind of kidding.
No, I agree. He should. I agree.
Oh no, Jared Harris. I mean, he was awesome in every little bit. You could see the politician of the OPA that cares about his people, but also has the bigger vision in his mind, but also is kind of a piece of shit, but also kind of an honorable guy. He feels that all perfectly.
I mean, he came off as very villainous to me when I first watched the show. More of like he's definitely a bad dude. Particularly in season 2 when he's like being very sort of politicking. But I don't know. It's still an amazing performance. Like I was gonna say before that the stuff where Dawes captures Miller and throws him in the air like oh, that was a waste of time, but the acting was so good. Like Jared Harris was just so good in those scenes, especially the scenes when he's telling the backstory of his sister and how he had to kill her in order to save the rest of his family. Like, god damn, that is such a good scene.
Oh, how did I not see this before? You're in love with me. Oh no, he is so good. It's no. Jared Harris was definitely a treat, and yeah, that's one section that could have gone because it was also like, why are you killing Miller here at this point?
Yeah.
I mean, I get the dichotomy as it shows that Miller, while corrupt, is still a cop, and he uses the airlock to threaten, but he's not going to kill you this way. Where Dawes is the bad guy because he's going to use the airlock to actually kill you and not just threaten you. I mean, I think there's a certain dichotomy of character in the story that you could see off of that. I just don't think that was really necessary. You could have just beat him up and thrown him out in the streets or whatever. And I don't think there would have been any change in the storyline going
Yeah,
forward.
you could have still had those great scenes, but just yeah, could have signed Lightning a little bit. Not like you don't need to have him throw him in the airlock. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the only move that I had. Everything else, when he had him beat up and was interrogating him, it's like, yeah, I tried the nice way, but you didn't want to do that, so now I got to try it the other way, you know.
And I
But
know
yeah,
this character.
yeah.
I know this character was in the books, but do we really need Havelock? It seemed like he was kind of a waste of time. I guess he was just there to be like the Earther, and so they would have a character there in order to dump all this exposition to the to the audience to be like because an Earther doesn't know the Belter ways, so them talking to him, explaining everything to him, is at the same time explaining everything to the audience, but he gets the pipe stabbed through him and somehow survives. I guess futuristic medical technology, I suppose, and then just fucks off, and we never see him again. So it kind of seemed like I don't know. Did we really need to have him there?
Short answer, no. Because yeah, he does effectively work as an audience crutch to introduce certain concepts or have Miller supposed to explain things. You know, it's the sidekick principle. Why is there a sidekick? Because there has to be some way to get exposition from the two
Yes.
characters and tell stuff out. But yeah, ultimately, I don't think that it's a character that's really needed. I mean, it does have a certain motivational bit for Miller in the sense of finding the killer, and that puts him at odds with makes his choice with Anderson Dawes, which has one way, and then later on Eros as they're escaping, you know, he specifically finds like, "Hey, you! I'm gonna be sure to shoot you. Come on, you're safe. No, you're not. You know." Um, and that kind of puts like a full end of story. But does that really serve a purpose or do anything? Not really. It could have been any cop that we knew or didn't know, and Miller still could be connected. I think it was just used both as an audience crutch and to force a couple of these encounters.
Well, so he does the character appears again in book 4, but he was cut out of the show. And maybe originally they were appearing, thinking that he would appear later on. They didn't realize that the actor would go do Magnum PI. But maybe they should have just recast him. But I don't know, because his return in book 4, you see that he's actually a good guy, and he stands up to Murtry, and he's like actually helps Naomi, and that's sort of, and so the seeds that were paid off in the first book sort of pay off in the fourth book, and so maybe they were thinking they would do the same thing in the show, and maybe that's why they had him. But the fact that he didn't appear in season 4 does make me think that he's kind of a waste of time.
They realized they didn't really like the guy.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to bring him back. So they shot him in the chest and let him walk away. No. Yeah, I mean, that would have ended up being kind of a nice callback at this point. It just, I mean, again, I don't have a problem with the character. It's kind of nice that he's this Earther that starts to care about the belt and has this connection. But then I don't know if that's a real good dichotomy because we meet a lot of Earthers that all care about the belt. So do we need this one extra one to come in? If he was more of a dick, then perhaps that would have had a better difference between both Holden and even Fred Johnson.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. But another thing I want to talk about is another change they did from the books that I wasn't a big fan of is the way that the Mercenate crew were first interacting with each other. Like they were first like very hostile to one another. Like Amos even threatened to like kill Holden. He was like, "Well, Naomi told me the only reason I'm not killing you right now is because Naomi wouldn't like it, or some bullshit." And he wasn't acting like that in the books. There wasn't. And then when they were in the Dullinger, like they were all like fighting each other, and he even like chokes Alex or something, and they're all like didn't trust each other. But in the books, like they gelled immediately. And now how Amos is in later seasons where he's like Holden's right hand man is like, yes, Captain. But in the start of this season, it's like, you're not the captain. You're not in charge. Why the fuck should I listen to you? And I feel like that stuff was just there to be gritty for gritty's sake or to create tension when I didn't think it actually needed to. And I think it would have actually made more sense that, like, if they gelled right away and stuck up from each other right away from being the only survivors in the Canterbury. I don't know. That was another thing I was just kind of, especially when I go back and watch episode 2, that's something that's very prominent in my mind.
It's called a character arc, Mark, and people need them for shows. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it kind of worked just because it just, you've got this disparate group of people that are forced together and they've got to get through their, figure out how they mesh and move in. And I don't think they take a long time to do it. I don't necessarily mind that they do, just because it does show growth and change. And for someone like Amos, I think that's a way to show how much that he is just, he's a different guy. His brain works differently. His difference of that is he's aware of it and he knows that he needs somebody to be his guide to tell him what's right and what's wrong, because he doesn't want to be a bad guy. He just knows that he can't really tell the difference. He's just a get the job done kind of guy. So the fact that he's connected with Naomi and has to earn Holden's trust, I think gives some meaty storytelling potentials. I mean, the fact that we even have that moment where the Martians are going to come on the ship and Amos is down there with the gun and Holden's like got the gun to him and he's like, take the shot if you need it. You're right there. You can do it. But this is the way that it's going to go. It's not, I don't know. To me, those are great character moments where if they're gelling immediately, you don't get to have that. And you also get the payoff when he does start going, oh yeah, Holden's the guy that I'm following. You can really see a shift and change, and I think it just gives storytelling potential. Now, maybe they leaned a little too far into that the first episode or two. You shouldn't hate each other. You're on the same ship. You were talking just like 20 minutes ago. Fine.
I really didn't like the scene you were just talking about when the Martians were going to board the ship and Holden was holding a gun at Amos. Like, I really thought that was unnecessary. I really see, the thing is, like, the stuff they did with Amos is showing that he has no moral compass and that that's why he latched on to Naomi. That is good. Like, you can keep that stuff, but I think just tone down the feuding with Holden, threatening to kill him, and having like Holden threaten to kill him and being like, you need to do something about, put a leash on your dog or whatever. Like, I think that to me, that feels like artificial tension. It doesn't feel like a character arc. It feels like artificial tension. Like, I feel like sure, you can have Amos like be uncertain about Holden at first. Maybe he's not like totally, yes, Captain, I'll do whatever you say at first. But I think they went overboard with the creating tension thing. And also, to me, it feels less like a character arc and more like a sudden character shift. Like, then all of a sudden season 2 is like, yeah, okay, Captain, I'll do whatever you want. And that didn't seem like it was a progression. It was more like jarring.
Sure. I mean, I can't disagree with you on that. I do think that at times they certainly overdid it, in the point where he's like, yeah, get a hold of your dog, was like, there's a scene there, and there's a scene in season 2 when he goes after Miller for, Miller stuff, which is also the same thing. Like, you seem like really super mad about this particular thing, maybe without justification for it. You're really leaning into I want to be expressive here.
Well, see, that scene in season 2 with Amos talking to Miller is a good example of where he's explaining what Holden's like and the type of man he is. And that's more the Amos from the books. That's more like the real Amos but In
Oh yeah.
season one, he didn't really have. You wouldn't expect him to talk like that, and he not really care about what Holden thinks or understand what Holden thinks or even give a shit. So to me, it really I get the impression that in between seasons, the writers are just suddenly decide, oh, we should actually write Amos differently. We should make him more friendly to Holden and drop some of this feuding stuff, which I actually do think was the correct way to go. But I don't think they should have done all that feuding stuff in the first place.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, yeah, I like the fact that they gelled together. I don't have so much of a problem with them not necessarily connecting in with. I would agree that there are definitely a couple of points through the season where you're like, okay, the animosity seems to be tracked a little higher up
Yes.
than what it feels justified for. Again, we have that opening scene that has Holden talking to Naomi and Amos on the cant, and they're talking fine and so on a few things, and he's the XO, and you feel that there's a reasonable, and then like all of a sudden once they're on the ship they're just like, well, who the hell are you, man? You're not in charge. Like, that was 20 minutes ago. What are you talking about?
No, that's exactly what I'm
So
saying.
yeah, I mean, I can certainly agree with that was probably not necessary. Though what was necessary was Shed losing his head in the Donager battle.
Oh
One
God,
of the coolest freaking
yes.
scenes. Here's something for you. Then he gets sucked away into there because he's got no head and there's a hole. That was just so beautifully
See,
done.
to me, watching that show for the first time, it felt like they were establishing that Game of Thrones type feeling that anyone could die at any time. Now,
Sure.
granted, as the show continues, most of the main characters are fairly like say, I mean Miller, of course, but that seemed a bit different. But for the most part, we stick with it. But I think that set it up though to really where no one was safe and you had that feeling of it.
Yeah, I mean, later on, obviously, we realized the whole Donager attack just showed who had plot armor and who didn't. Because the only people that lived are the crew of the Rossi, and everyone else died. Um, but yeah, I mean, then that was one of those nice bits. What, in the beginning, you lose the cant. Oh my God, poor Holden and your girlfriend, Addie something? I don't know. I can't remember her name. I
Oh,
think it is
at
Addie or
at a or something. Yeah,
Addie, yeah.
something like that,
Um, oh no, what's her name? I'll never forget you.
yeah.
So yeah, and then what, by 3 or 4 there, then you lose Shed, and you're just down to this small little handful. And then everybody else starts dropping left and right. The one surviving Martian dies, after like, oh, ship, give them permission to act, and then he dies. I mean, it's just
So good.
uh,
Yeah.
perfect timing on all of that. Uh, but yeah, it is one of those nice setups, and you kind of need to do that. It gives you the stakes. Man, we've lost so much in the first couple episodes. Now you're like, heck, what's gonna happen? Of course, and then you find out you can be thrown out in space, and just someone will pick you up in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So I want to say hi to Belinda. Hello. Great to see you. I haven't seen you in a little while. Dropping in to say hi. Really happy to see someone talking Expanse again. LOL, Mark. I can see we still have differences of opinion, especially when you can't separate the books from the show. Anyway, hi. How's it going? And it's okay to have differences of opinion. That's all good. But I will say, I can separate the books from the show because there's some things that as I was talking about earlier before you jumped in, there's some things I think the show did better than the books, and some things the books did better than the show. So it's kind of a give and take, and I think the ratio is different season to season, and I think later seasons. I think overall I like the show better than the books, and I think I think that is like the main point. But there's some things particularly in season one, I think could have been adapted a bit better.
Yeah, it's funny. We always, when we were doing these before, we ended up, kind of ranking. Where would this rank in your lists of seasons and stuff like that? And we did this one through our original review, and um, I do have to say, in many ways, while I love this show, this maybe the lowest rank of the seasons, only because
Hmm.
I think they get like progressively better and better from season to season as you go on. And even the ones where I'm like, oh, I'm not really like this. Like 4, I kind of like, but there's also so many little bits in there that are just totally awesome. Like I love how they show it, and there's some these great moments. And then, yeah, I'm not so big on Marco and Eros, but man, there's a lot of great stuff in that storyline and the
See,
way they tell and they do these things. So it's like the show really seems to improve on
yeah.
every iteration.
Yeah. Oh, Belinda's saying, I'm just giving you a hard time. I agree with you for the most. Well, thanks. Yeah, it's all good to give me a hard time. But anyway, yeah, and it's all good to agree to disagree on certain things, such as the way I agree to disagree with Darren and Alyssa on Marco and Naru, who I think is one of the best villains ever made. But they're like, oh, he's so cheesy and two dimensional. And I think you guys are wrong about that. I think he comes off as realistic. We're just having this discussion in the House of the Dragon. I almost brought up Marco and ours because you're talking about, oh yeah, sometimes real life people are just like that evil and power hungry. I'm like Marco and ours, who I think comes off as a lot of real life leaders personally.
Oh yeah, no. Keon Alexander. I mean, as much as I can wane or wax on Marcos, I got to say that Keon Alexander, who plays Marco in Aros, um, really invests in that. And I really think that he is making a lot of big choices, whether or not I always agree with those choices or it's coming across the way. I mean, I don't know. I play with it a lot, which is like I say, I could be like, I don't really like Marco, and then we get to the season and I'm watching it and I'm just like, yeah, but I kind of like what's going on right now. So it's yeah, as I said, it's there's little back and forth, but I kind of like looking at Marco as someone who knows how tiny he is, but is really trying to be bigger, and he's driven by his own kind of like psycho obsession. There's some plays the way that Keon plays him where I'm like, I don't know, is this what you're thinking? But there's just the way that he dresses and kind of struts and everything. It's kind of like you feel like you got little guy syndrome, but which is funny because spacers are supposed to be so much taller than earthers. Um,
Yeah, the show was always not consistent with doing that, but that's fair. Like you got to
yeah.
work with like you got to hire a great actor like Jared Harris, even though he doesn't have the build of a or Thomas Jane, even though they don't have necessarily the build of
Well,
Belters as they were
I know in the
described.
book Naomi's supposed to be really tall, and I thought their casting was freaking perfect. You
Really,
know,
she that tall?
I thought I remembered when. I mean, I don't know.
I
As I
didn't
said,
remember seeing. I mean, she is. I think isn't she around the same height as Holden, if I'm remembering correctly? I don't know. Maybe she is taller. Maybe I'm not remembering this.
she's taller than show Naomi. So yeah, I mean,
But I know that talk about great casting is Frankie Adams is Bobby Draper. But again, this is getting more
oh,
into season two.
right.
Like if you've seen pictures of her standing next to her castmates, just like normal, and their normal time, she's like dwarfs them. She's like way taller than them.
Oh no,
Uh,
her casting is perfect. Okay, Belinda says that yes, Naomi towers over Jim in the books.
yeah.
I thought I remembered that, but
Yes. No, that's definitely true in the books. Yeah. But like
again, this
in
is
general, in the books, Belters are like way taller than everyone and like just very skinny. Like I was gonna bring up the character that they had, the actor they had in the show that I think really like seemed like a real Belter as described in the books was that prostitute that Havelock was hanging out with and sort of befriended and was getting like Belter lessons from. Like that actress was like super tall and
yeah.
skinny. Like this is, but I understand. Like I don't begrudge the show for not hiring everyone like that because it's better to get good actors than to
By
worry
far.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, by far. No, no, no. I mean, their casting really was pretty much top
Oh
notch
yes,
for
absolutely.
everyone. I cannot really complain about anyone, uh, almost anyone, with their casting. But they can't tell the future when you cast people, folks. Um, so yeah. I mean, I know that there are again there's those differences, but I think going back to Marco, I like some of the choices Keon makes, and in some ways, I kind of feel like he is one of those mental short guys who's playing it bigger because he knows who he is.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That makes me enjoy his performance a lot more. So that's just how I'm gonna watch it. It's
Fair
my
enough.
head canon, folks.
Fair enough. And Belinda's saying they hit the jackpot with Frankie. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Funny story that I went to film school in New Zealand, and my instructor was a director, producer, actor from Samoa. She was, the head teacher running the film school. And I saw once there was a Samoan movie that she was in with Frankie Adams. And I saw a picture. I was like, hey, that's my teacher with Bobby Draper.
Right on. See, it's a big universe, but it's a small universe.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add about season one.
No, as I said, I mean it was an amazing show for its time. I really love the pacing. I love the storylines that they have with it. You know, whether or not they're able to get all the first book in it for what they actually presented to us, I think was kind of an amazing bit. And the fact that they had to keep working hard as time went on to get the series renewed and then move over to Prime and to try and get a few more seasons up out of this so that at least they could tell that big chunk of the story. It's worth it. It shows what a good adaptation can look like. I think it shows the importance of having the creators involved with it, or how it can be a plus. Sometimes that can be a minus because not everybody works well in groups. But there's a lot of love and craft evident in every episode of this season, and
Oh yeah.
this is really the way that I think shows should be done, and would love to see more. It is worth rewatching over and over again. As I said, once I finished this one, I was like, well, I'll just watch one from season 2 just because I got some time, and I'm like 3 episodes in. I'm like, great, I'm going to end up watching the whole series all over again, and I'm going to love every minute of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As I said, I once called this my favorite show of all time, and I sort of stand by. There's a reason why I want to keep talking about it, even though my videos on it don't get nearly as many views as when I talk about other shows. I just love the show so much. And yeah, I gotta address Belinda in the chat saying it really, really helps when you keep the core creative team throughout the entire series. And both book authors and the writers' room, Expanse was a totally singular series in that regards, and I absolutely agree. Especially having the authors be in the writing staff, and they actually became more sort of prominent as the show went on. Like, I'm sorry, I think that makes it better than Game of Thrones. I think, especially with that ending Game of Thrones had, like this is what they lacked. I think The Expanse is a singular series in that regard.
No, completely. I think look, this is a beautiful example. If we want to talk to studios and those streaming executives, who I know you're all watching,
Yeah.
and this is what you do all day. This is a beautiful example of why long episodes for prestige television, 13 to 15 episodes, the importance of writers' rooms and keeping them together
Yes.
all the time is important. It allows stories to be honed. It allows foreshadowing to come in. It allows the craft to come in. It allows characters to be perfected. It becomes the storylines that people will watch over and over again and come back to and do streaming shows to talk live about over and over again, because these are the stories that really drive us forward. And if you're not going to invest in the time, if you're not going to invest in the people, if you're not going to invest in the craft, then all you're making effectively are really expensive red notices that people are going to maybe watch once it premieres and then it's going to die off. Or you just invest in someone's ego and you're going to get Rebel Moon Part 38, you know, even slower motion.
Jesus Christ! Don't even get me started on
and
what's his face, Snyder.
Zack Snyder, yeah.
Zack Snyder. Yeah, don't get me started on
I mean, it takes a group of people to feed back and forth. You need to get your original creatives, to get a solid writer's room and a chance and breadth to really invest and tell stories. It's the way that you need to, it's the way that things should be done to really get the quality down. And if you're not going to have this type of investment into shows, you're not going to get this type of quality work. Or if you do it, it's going to be a fluke die roll, and there's no way you're going to predict how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. Sorry, Brandon, that was a little mean. But I've got problems with Zack Snyder, and I will happily talk about them. Though I will be honest, one of his favorite films that he ever made was The Owls of Ga'Hoole. It's an animated one.
Hadn't seen that one. Hadn't seen
but it was a blast. And his Dawn of the Dead remake, I thought was really good too. I really enjoyed that. I just think that he's gotten too full of himself. This is not the Zack Snyder discussion. I'm sorry. Expanse.
Fair enough. Here, I was going to break out something I read the other day and did a review on it. It's the Expanse comic book series. It was 12 issues. I collected each one, waited until I got them all, read them all at once. I usually don't. This is the first time I've read comic books in like decades. I don't normally read comic books, but with the Expanse, I'm like, I got to check these out. And the guy who wrote it, you could tell like he was a fan. He understood the characters. He captured the characters. I would highly recommend it. It takes place after season 6, and it's supposed to take place in between that 30-year gap in between books 6 and 7. But it does follow the continuity of the show because there's no Alex and there's a drummer, and that is preferable. But yeah, that's I would highly recommend them. They were so good.
You're never making a wrong choice with more drummer. We're only not talking about her because she's not till season 2. Folks.
Not till season 2.
Yeah. And I would be remiss, sorry, folks, that this whole discussion I have yet to show off my wife's new gift to me.
Oh, right.
The Rossi. I got my own Rossi.
I have like maybe 5 Expanse shirts, but I'm not wearing one right now. Didn't think of it, but anyway.
I have this one to join my Beltalowda. Oye, Beltalowda t-shirt. So
all right, so another thing I gotta show off real quick. Gonna wake him up a bit. Here's my cat, Holden. And then over there is Naomi, but she's sleeping. I don't want to disturb her.
Don't disturb a sleeping Naomi. It's a wrong choice there.
We got Holden and Naomi. And when I told Alyssa that's what I named them, they're like, of course that's what you named your cats.
Any other choice would have been the wrong choice, Mark. So yeah, you did the right thing.
Fair enough. Although one of my Patreon supporters argued that drummer would have been a better name, but I was like, all right, maybe if I got a singular cat. But yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you got 2 cats, they got to go together, and Naomi and Holden.
Yeah.
Yeah, just does seem perfect together.
And I think they got all right. So the personality is Holden, my cat, is very sort of unruly and doesn't follow the rules and just does whatever he wants. And Naomi likes to whine a lot, likes to meow a lot.
So not really of their namesakes.
Well, I thought they were actually.
No, that is a good point.
Because Holden always did his in the show. Holden always did his own thing. Yeah.
I guess I don't see Naomi whining a whole lot, but then again,
true. There's a lot of haters. There's a lot of Naomi haters out there that think she does, but I'm not. I never understood the Naomi haters personally.
Yeah. Some people just don't make sense, man. Some people just don't make sense. Nothing you can do about it. Sad.
All right. So yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. Oh, is that Holden? Yeah, he's jumping back there. But so if you wanted to give your rating, did you think about your rating out of 10 for season one as a whole, Darren?
Oh, I would probably give it a 9 because it's, again, there's only a couple of little points where it doesn't, it's still working on its stuff, but it's an amazing series. And again, I think some of the lighting stuff, maybe a little pacing, a couple of little moments here and there. But for a series out the gate for a first season, I think they mostly hit it out of the park. I say I've got a few little things that I think that they were just trying to figure out, but like I said, I even think like halfway through the season they had worked out a lot of their stuff that they seemed like in the earlier part of the season they were still playing with. So um, I I think they did great. So yeah, I'd easily give it a 9. Can't do a 10 because it's not perfect, but I'll give it a 9.
I
I'll
actually
do
think
everything else 9.1, 9.2.
no points, no decimal points, not allowed on my channel. No, but I think I'd actually give this an 8. And as I said, it's the lowest rated season, and for an 8 to be the lowest rated season tells you it's a damn good show.
Yeah.
It's just because the way it's formatted. I think they should have ended where book one ended, and there was a bit of unnecessary filler. The whole Uncle Mateo and Holden's mother thing, and it was kind of confusing at first, but yeah, once it hit its stride, like, and even before it hit its stride, it was still, there was amazing things about it. The whole Dullinger fight, it was that, like the scene where I didn't even talk about the scene where Holden like kicked Naomi up in the air in order to like get back when they lost gravity. Like that was so good, and it was like people shooting at them. So Belinda gives it an 8.75. So I guess a bit closer to you. But yeah, no, I think, and plus, yeah, once we get to the last set of episodes, it's just really damn good. And oh yeah, and the Fred, like the way it shows like characters' backstories, like Fred Johnson and Julie Mal, that we didn't get in the books, and they did a much better job. Like they just really improved in some areas.
Yeah, and those were amazing, emotionally impactful bits too. So again, it's not just like, oh, we're adding some backstory and some extra color. Those
Yeah.
are actually parts that we continue to talk about.
Yes.
You know.
Oh, and another thing I liked is that in the books originally, like Holden was not Holden Miller was talking to like Julie Mount in his head like throughout the entire thing, and I'm glad they didn't do that. Instead, they just had the image of Julie Mount appear like towards the end of the season, and then in season two, or actually no, it was this season where we actually see that Julie Mouse sees Miller right before she dies. And I don't know if you ever heard this, but I heard the creators of the show describe this as it's kind of, since the protomolecule is non-linear, like they are joined through the protomolecule eventually, and it's like sort of a non-linear foreshadowing of their connection to each other.
It is, we'll make our little we can make a little BSG connection. It's like that moment where you have Baltar seeing Six all the time, and then you see Six who sees her own version of Baltar in her head, and you start
Oh,
to
right.
realize that there is this odd little connection between these two
Yeah, yeah,
individuals.
yeah.
Um, and no, and I think that's nicer because they only have her show up when he's like really, when he's got something right, when he feels like he's on the trail, then she's there like looking at him or smiling or any of that. And then yeah, later on when you get to see the point where she's seeing him, it justifies his pursuit. Like he's feeling this connection, but is he just like the creepy detective that's looking for one last thing to latch onto? And that bit with when you get to see Julie's Expanse, where she does see Miller walk through, that there is some sort of connection. You realize, no, these are two important parts of a storyline that do have a connection together. We see later on by the end of book one, but though that's season two. Um, I, I
Yeah,
think I think those choices were great. I think they're signposts now as opposed to constantly in your mind things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll talk about this when we come back for season 2 a bit more. But I was watching an interview with Ty Frank, one of the authors of the book, and he was saying he disagreed with the decision to play Miller and Julie relationship as a romance and to have them kiss. And that's one area where I had to totally respectfully disagree with him on. I personally think is one of the best romances in fiction. Personally,
Yeah. Um, no, I think that it really works, but I think you need this flashback scene to make that work because
yes,
that means that it's
absolutely,
two-sided, that she
yeah.
sees him and makes a connection, and that's when he shows up again. It's not just, Miller imposing his story on top of this proto-molecule form of Julie, that there is an actual connection, and I think that that makes it so much realer. Without having these moments, I don't think that that would pay itself off as well. So no,
Totally.
I like the choices they made with this. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that is it. We'll go ahead and end our discussion here on the Expanse season 1. Um, I don't know when we'll be back for season 2. Whenever I finish watching it, as I said, I'm going slow, so it's probably going to be a couple months or whatever. But that's fine. We have a lot going on in the meantime. So, Darrin, if you want to tell people what's up with you and where people can find you, what are you doing these
what's
days?
up with me is some of the more exciting stuff we got going on here on Enchantment of Eternity, and that's on Monday nights. We're doing House of the Dragon. We even got one more person, the awesome Melissa, with us. So yeah, that's mostly what I'm doing is I'm hanging out with Mark talking about cool shows. Um, my channel is kind of on hiatus at the moment. I've had a few plans to do things, but honestly, my regular life is just very busy. So I'm excited that I do get to take little breaks here and talk about some awesome stuff with Mark over here on Enchantment of Eternity. So mostly you'll catch me off and on here, but I do have a whole bunch of archived reviews of some wonderful shows over on D's Reviews here on YouTube. It's D''S space reviews. I'm not very creative. You can go ahead and check that out. A lot of Marvel stuff, a lot of Star Wars things, a lot of zombies, or at least a good chunk of zombies for a good little while. So yeah, if you're into sci-fi, if you're into that kind of stuff, go over to D's Reviews. We got some great reviews in the archives. But for new stuff, it's going to be me on Enchantment Eternity for right now. Monday nights, 9 o'clock Eastern.
Yeah. Cool. So, if you're finding me for the first time, my name is Mark. My channel is Enchantment of Eternity. I mostly cover Star Trek with my channel. I'm going through every episode of Star Trek at the moment. I'm in season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation, but also covering House of the Dragon. As Darrin mentioned, we'll be doing a live discussions every Monday night, and I love The Expanse. So, I do try to talk about it when I can. So, as I said, eventually we'll be back again and talk about season 2. If you haven't checked it out, check out my review for the Expanse comic book. It is spoiler-free review, so if you haven't read them, you don't need to worry about spoilers. But better yet, read the comic books anyway. They're so good. I know Brandon said he had bought them on Kindle, so there you go. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks everyone for joining the chat. We'll see you next time.